Hello, everybody. So today, or this module, for the primary source this week, we're going to be talking about the Epic of Gilgamesh. And Gilgamesh is a very important figure in Mesopotamian history, especially in the city of Uruk, where he was king. And the most important thing about this epic is that it really encapsulates a lot of the themes that you're going to see across not only Mesopotamia, Southwest Asia, but also into South Asia and across into Europe. The Homeric tales of the Iliad and the Odyssey also really borrow a lot from this tale. So the most important thing to know is that this was a written tale. So this is we are into history. So about 5,200 years ago, the writing form known as cuneiform was developed in Mesopotamia in the land known as Sumer, which is where the Sumerians get their name. So in Sumer, they developed this tale about this king, and his name was Gilgamesh. And this king was from the parts that you read, right? He is a ruthless tyrant, and so one of the aspects that we didn't get to read was the foundations of Sumer. So, or the foundations of Uruk. So I'm going to read that to you real quick here. So. He who saw the deep, the country's foundation, this is Gilgamesh, who knew was wise in all matters. Gilgamesh, who saw the deep, the country's foundation, who knew was wise in all matters. He everywhere, and learnt of everything the sum of wisdom. He saw what was secret, discovered what was hidden. He brought back a tale before the deluge, and I'll go into that in a little bit. He came, a far road was weary, found peace, and set all his labors on a tablet of stone. He built the rampart of Uruk, the sheepfold of holy Eanna, the sacred storehouse. See its wall like a strand of wool, view its parapet that none could copy, take the stairway of a bygone era, draw near to Eanna, seat of Ishtar, the goddess, that no later king could ever copy. Climb the Uruk's wall and walk back and forth, survey its foundations, examine the brickwork. Were its bricks not fired in an oven? Did the 7 sages not lay its foundation? A square mile is city, a square mile date grove. A square mile is a clay pit, half a square mile the temple of Ishtar, 3 square miles and a half is Uruk's expanse. So what that goes into right there is those are all the aspects of civilization. So we have the square mile of city, the square mile of date grove, right? Because agriculture is the thing that makes cities viable, as we saw in Module 1. And the half square mile for the temple, which is interesting that the temple is not as prominent in its expanse, but it also does go up, right? Because it's a ziggurat, so it's going up. So there's some kind of aspect there that's a little bit different because its total foundation, right, is probably in and about a square mile, right? Because you have the square mile of the bottom of the ziggurat, and then you have maybe a little bit less than a than a half square mile for the top. And so this is the place where people commune with the gods. And then you have a square mile for a clay pit for pottery. So, and then we have, what else did we hear about? We heard about storehouses, and we heard about walls. So these are all of the aspects of civilization, right? So storehouses for food, clay pots for food, for transportation, walls for defense, the date grove as a symbol of agriculture. So, this is how the Epic of Gilgamesh begins. I read you the very beginnings. This is the what's normally known as the prologue to Gilgamesh, and then you all read the next probably about maybe roughly 100 lines, 150 lines of the text, because this is a poem, as you saw. So from my reading. The version that you read is a little bit more in prose, which makes it a little bit more palatable for a modern audience. So Gilgamesh, let's get into what you read. So Gilgamesh, he is both mortal and immortal, and he is technically, this shows you how the Mesopotamians think, right? So he is 2/3 mortal and 1/3 immortal, which, do not ask me how that works. That made perfect sense to the Mesopotamians. One of the reasons why they go in thirds here is because their system is based on sixes. Their counting system is based on sixes instead of fives, like our counting system is. And if you want a reference to that, that is exactly the reason why the clock is still in a 60 system. If you've ever noticed clocks, so you have 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour, and then you have 24 hours in a day, and all of those things equal can break down to sixes. So that's one of the reasons why this 2/3 third thing kind of makes sense to them. So let's just skate right past that because that's odd. So Gilgamesh starts his reign, right, and he is a tyrant. He is taking all the men for his armies, and he is taking all of the virgin women, and he is basically abusing his rights as king, abusing his legitimacy as king for not only conquest with men, but sexual conquest with women. And the people are unhappy about this, right? As anybody would be if they were under a tyrant. And the way that they express their dissatisfaction is they pray to the gods, and they say to the gods, please bring us something or someone that will remove this tyrant from his place and his place of power, and give us our freedom back. And so the people are sent Enkidu. And Enkidu, as you saw, is a wild man. He's very much like Gilgamesh. He's actually exactly like Gilgamesh. He's the same size. He's the same build. He actually looks very similar to Gilgamesh, and that equality is the gods saying that we hear you, and here is your savior, Enkidu. Enkidu means gift of Enki, or gift of Enlil, who is the head god of the Mesopotamian pantheon. roughly synonymous with Zeus. He's a storm god, just like Zeus in the Greek mythology, or Jupiter in the Roman mythology. And so this Enki, or this Enkidu, he goes and he's a wild man. So he lives with the gazelles and he lives with the animals. He runs with the gazelles. He eats grass, right? Like, he doesn't do anything that's civilized. He doesn't wear any clothes. And the for a long time, the people don't even know that he exists until a trapper, or a hunter, sometimes as he's referred to in the texts, goes out into the wilderness, and he sees Enkidu, and he knows that that this is an important person, and so he goes back to the Uruk, and he gets a woman who's known as Shamhat. And Shamhat is in your text, and in a lot of texts actually, she's referred to as a prostitute. It's difficult. She's not really a prostitute. She's a priestess. She is a sacred prostitute. And so she's actually the word that they're known by is they're called harimtus. Harimtu. And so a harimtu is, you might actually notice that the Arabic word for harem is in here. And harem means, harem is the group of women that are sexually available to the sultan in later Arabic tradition and Arabic civilization. But this word harem, which means forbidden, is a little bit different than this word harimtu. Harimtu means sacred. It does also have a signification of forbidden, but a harimtu would basically have sex with men and possibly women when they went to the temple. And this sacred sex was part of the ritual. This is a form of prayer to the Mesopotamian people. So the trapper, the hunter, he gets Shamhat and he brings her out to the wild man Enkidu, and Enkidu sees her and he's intrigued, and she bears her sex to him. Right? She undresses herself, and they have sex for 6 days and 7 nights. And after they have sex, the wildness of Enkidu is lost. This is really, really important, because what have we already seen with the tale of Gilgamesh? What is Gilgamesh doing? Gilgamesh is performing. He is assaulting the sexual rights of women and the virgin women and the men that they are attached to. And so in violating that sexual conduct, that's bad sex, right? He is actually performing uncivilizing sex. So we have Gilgamesh, who is your civilized king, doing an uncivilized act, right? And then we have Enkidu and Shamhat. Enkidu as your uncivilized wild man, and Shamhat as the one who brings him civilization through good sex, through civilizing sex. And so in that, through that act, he is then, after he has sex with her, right? He goes back to the gazelles, and back to the wild animals, and they run away from him because they don't want to have anything to do with him anymore. So he is now civilized, and so he goes back to Shamhat, and he's like, now I need you to show me what to do, right? Because I can't go live with my brethren anymore, who I grew up with. And so Shamhat does a few things. She feeds him bread, right? We already saw the storehouses in this. So she feeds him bread. He used to eat grass, now he eats bread, right? Civilizing bread. Then she gives him alcohol, right? He used to drink water, now he drinks alcohol. Alcohol is a civilizing drink. If anybody knows the Odyssey, Odysseus finds himself in the cave of this giant savage, right, the Cyclops. And the way that he gets out of this giant's cave is he tricks him by feeding him alcohol, by giving him a really strong liquor. And the savage Cyclops can't hold his liquor because he's not civilized. And so what we see here is, and the other thing that Shamhat does is she then clothes Enkidu. She gives him clothes. And so after that happens, Enkidu is now completely civilized, right? He eats bread, he drinks alcohol, he wears clothes, and he has good civilizing sex. So those are the four things that basically make him into a civilized person. And so the next episode, right, is that he goes back to the city with Shamhat. Enkidu goes back to the city with Shamhat. And when he gets there, he realizes that Gilgamesh is violating these virgin women. And he knows, because he's now civilized, that is not okay. And so he goes and he braces himself in the doorway of a woman who was just recently married, who Gilgamesh would then violate, right? And they wrestle because Gilgamesh won't let him pass. And so Gilgamesh and Enkidu wrestle, and in different versions of Gilgamesh, it's a stalemate. Their wrestling match is a stalemate, or the version that I gave you, Gilgamesh barely wins, right? He's just strong enough to overcome Enkidu, but then what does Enkidu do? Enkidu says, "You, Gilgamesh, are immortal," right? Because Enkidu has a connection to the gods that Gilgamesh doesn't have, even though he's 1/3 immortal, right? And so Enkidu here performs the function of a priest, right? And Shamhat performs the function of a priestess. So these are your the dichotomy, right, between the male and the female priestess, right? And this is what this dichotomy is what brings Gilgamesh out of his savage, tyrannical ways back to civilization. And so, of course, what happens is Gilgamesh and Enkidu become bros, right? They're fast friends, or I should say bros, right? And then they go on a bunch of adventures together. So let's talk about a few of those adventures, because you didn't get to read the end of the text, or the majority of the text. So they go and they destroy the ogre who rules the cedar forest. And cedar, which is the type of wood, is really, really, really important to Mesopotamian peoples, because there's even a Sargon II, not Sargon the First the Great, but Sargon II of Akkad. Actually, there's a tablet which is still extant, which is still exists, in which one of his commanders basically sends back to Sargon, and he says, we can't get you any good wood because there's no cedar here. I've got this fir this pine type tree, but it's no good, right? It's not as good as cedar. So when Gilgamesh and Enkidu go and destroy the ogre who was put there by the gods to protect the cedar forest, when they destroy him, they also bring in that cedar forest into the purview of the civilization of Uruk. And so, and there's some odd play there, right? Because Enkidu and Gilgamesh together are supposed to be this, right? This is the priest and the king, right? This is the philosopher king. This is the sacred royalty, which is supposed to be the pinnacle of civilization. This is supposed to be exactly where civilization is supposed to go. But in this certain circumstance, it's not. It's not good. They violate their role. And so just because, this is another thing that is a really important theme, is just because you're in the right place, just because you've done the right thing, you've performed all the right rituals, doesn't mean that you are going to take the moral stance. Doesn't mean you are going to make the moral act. And so you'll see that again throughout some of the tales in this course. And so after they go and they destroy the ogre who rules the cedar forest, who protects the cedar forest, Ishtar, the goddess Ishtar, who's actually the sacred goddess of Shamhat. Shamhat is basically a priestess of Ishtar. She goes to Gilgamesh and she says, "Well, I would like to marry you." And he says, "Well, you're a priestess. You are a sacred prostitute. You're a sacred priestess who has sex for ritual purposes. So I'm not going to marry you, right? You are the connection to the gods. You are the guardian of the people who have that connection to the gods, that sacred sex. But you're not good for marriage, right? You're not a virgin, so you're not good for marriage, so I won't marry you." And so Ishtar gets really, really upset, and she goes to her father, and she says, Enki, and she says, if you do not destroy Gilgamesh, I am going to scream so loud that I will raise the dead. Which is, of course, probably the first time zombies come out in any literature, in world literature. So he doesn't want that to happen. So he's like, okay, fine. So he said, here, you can take the sacred bull. The sacred bull is Taurus, right? The zodiac symbol, Taurus. Taurus. So you can take Taurus. You can take the sacred bull, and you can go and attack Gilgamesh with the sacred bull. Well, unfortunately for Ishtar, Enkidu and Gilgamesh are badasses, right? And so when the sacred bull attacks and he rampages throughout Uruk, they defeat him because they're the heroes, right? These two guys together are like, having like two Supermen on the same side. And so they defeat the bull, and because they violated Enkidu and Gilgamesh have violated the gods now twice, right? By killing the ogre who was sent by the gods to protect the cedar forest, and now the sacred bull, they decide that one of them has to die. And so when they decide that Enkidu's got to die. And so Enkidu is overcome with the disease. He suffers for a long time before he finally dies. And Gilgamesh is absolutely distraught from this, because one of the things that he's been wrestling with, right, is he's only 1/3 immortal. His majority is mortal. And so he's struggling with his immortality, or his mortality, right? He doesn't have immortality and he wants it. And so he figures out that, well, there's one guy, and I'm not gonna write his name on the board because it's not totally important, but I am gonna tell you. So his name is Utanapishtim, and Utanapishtim is essentially the Mesopotamian Noah, right? So back thousands of years ago, the gods had decided that people were too evil, too sinister, and they were immoral, and so they wiped them all out with a massive flood. But one guy survived because one of the gods told him to build an ark. And so he builds an ark. He gets all of the things of civilization on it, all of the tools of civilization, all the animals that are domesticated, all the domesticated seeds, and he puts them all on an ark, and he survives the flood. And so the gods say, well, nothing mortal can survive this flood, so here's immortality. The immortality that they give him is a plant, and it's called the plant of rejuvenation. And so he tells, so Gilgamesh has this really long journey, which I won't get into, to get to Utanapishtim. He has to go past all these monsters and all this stuff, and through the waters of death, right, through basically the Styx River, right, if you know Greek mythology. So the river, or the ocean, the body of water that separates the mortal realm from the immortal realm. And so he goes through the waters of death, Gilgamesh does, and he gets to Utanapishtim. And he says, what do I need to do to gain immortality? And Utanapishtim tells him that what he has to do is he has to defeat death, he has to defeat death's younger brother, sleep. And so he says, don't sleep for 7 days. You have to not sleep for a week. And of course, because Gilgamesh has just gone on this really long journey, what does he do? He falls asleep immediately. And so after falling asleep immediately, he actually sleeps for a week. And he gets up and he's like, I failed. And Utanapishtim is like, yeah, you failed. But if you want to know how to get this plant, I will tell you anyways. And so he tells him that at the bottom of this body of water, at the bottom of this ocean, is the plant of rejuvenation. And so Gilgamesh goes down to get it, to go get this plant. And he gets it, but as soon as he gets out of the water, he puts it down, and a snake comes and takes it away. And as soon as that happens, the snake loses its skin, right? Because when a snake sheds its skin, it's reborn. Which is why, if you've ever seen this symbol of the snake devouring its own tail, called an Ouroboros, that's one of the reasons why this is the symbol of eternity, right? This is basically the ancient form of this, right? So this is the symbol of eternity, and the snake basically has this ability to rejuvenate itself. And so, but Gilgamesh is distraught because he's lost the plant and it's all gone, and he has no way of ever gaining immortality. And so he goes back and he's really sad, and he realizes his own mortality, and he realizes that Enkidu is never going to come back. But with that, he has a new resolve, right? And his new resolve is he needs to be the best king that he can be. And so as we started with this tyrant who was doing savage and uncivilized things, overstepping his power, overstepping his legitimacy, he now comes back, and this tale of the Epic of Gilgamesh ends the exact same way that it begins. And so let me read it to you. O Urshanabi, Urshanabi is the ferryman, like Charon in Greek mythology, who takes you from the bodies, takes you over the waters of death. It says, "O Urshanabi, climb Uruk's wall and walk back and forth. Survey its foundations. Examine the brickwork. Were its bricks not fired in an oven? Did the 7 sages not lay its foundations? A square mile is city, a square mile Daygrove, a square mile is a clay pit. A half square mile is the temple of Ishtar. 3 square miles and a half is Uruk's expanse." So, this new resolve, right? This new legitimacy overcomes Gilgamesh, and now he is the king that he should have always been. And he's no longer a tyrant. Now he's a great king. And this tale of the Epic of Gilgamesh is the reason why he can the reason why he can overcome this this loss of his immortality. And so some of the themes, right, that we've talked about, right, is immortality versus mortality, right? Good kings, right, having legitimacy in your kingship. The interplay, the juxtaposition of the priest and the priest and the priestess, right? And all of this was written down in a text on clay tablets, right, with a stylus that is now transmitted to you, right? And if you can see that, that is the bowl of heaven. So all of these themes, right, come together in Gilgamesh. And so I hope that when you read it, or if you've already read it, maybe you have a new appreciation for what you read, or if you haven't read it yet, you will appreciate the way that the text is written, the themes that it goes over. Of course, I went into the whole story, or at least a synopsis of the whole story, and you all are only getting a little snippet of it. But I thought that it was a really interesting snippet, so I hope that you enjoy it, and I will see you in the next lecture.